Hello and welcome to the Wisden Cricket Weekly podcast. I'm your host, Ben Gardner, and this week I'm joined in the studio by Cam Ponsonby, Taha Hashim, and Phil Walker, back from his holiday today. How was it, Phil?
Blimey, we're doing kind of knockabout chat.
Yeah,
just to kick off.
Why not?
It was genuinely marvellous. It was my anniversary, so I went up north to Derbyshire, and then it culminated in Jim Wallace's wedding over the weekend. Obviously, a Wisden stalwart these days, and he did a lovely speech. Did Jim? Then his best men did a very cricket-infused speech. But a good time was had by all. Taha joined us. He made the cut. Conspicuously, the only person from this side of the business that made the cut. I was surprised at that.
I was invited, but someone had to man the desk.
Oh,
here,
I see.
yeah.
I wasn't invited, just for the record.
But no, it's been lovely. Thank you for asking. I have to say that the cricket thing I know has existed. It's been going on in the last week. But you'll find that I might be a little bit hazy on one or two details. Mm-hmm. Just a bit of pre-warning for you.
Well, I clocked it as your anniversary because in the 2 home summers leading up to your wedding, Joe Root made 0 international hundreds. 0 test hundreds at home. And since you've tied the knot, he's made 6 test hundreds at home, with one following minutes after.
He made one on my actual wedding day, didn't he?
Yeah.
Last year against India, which was very good of him, I thought. And I actually did a podcast on my wedding day from the venue, a rival podcast. Other podcasts, believe it or not, are available. And I did do that one on the final word with Collins et al. Yep. But no, thank you for asking, Ben, genuinely.
Cool.
Now let's crack on.
Yeah, let's get on to... Well, we'll get on to some actual cricket in a second. First, we'll get on to people talking about cricket. The ENGvSA Africa series starts this week, so we'll talk about who's winning the on and off-field battles. Do the 100, do the One Day Cup. We've got a bad news for international cricket section, which is basically a weekly feature now, and it's a bumper one this time. But let's start with ENGvSA Africa, and specifically South Africa. Phil, you've banned Bazball from the magazine, which coincidentally is what South Africa have also sort of reportedly done in their dressing room. Dean Elgar is telling everyone who'll listen, including WCM First, that he is absolutely not concerned by Bazball. He wants to make absolutely clear that he is not concerned about it. And Rick Norkia says, when he's asked about it, that it's like people talking another language. My question is, if this is basically a worthless concept that even McCullum and Rob Key don't like, why is it seeming to irk South Africa so much?
It's odd to be scared of something that doesn't exist. Look, it's good to see that there's a little bit of needle and a little bit of buzz in the build up to a series, because obviously you tend to get all that stuff with Australia, but you don't tend to get it too much with other. They're more decorous, the build up to normal Test series outside of the Ashes. But South Africa fancy this, and under Elgar they have built a particularly spiky and unified cricket team. The whole notion of BB, whatever you want to call it, is obviously completely antithetical to Dean Elgar and the way that he understands cricket and the way that he wants to play cricket. And so it does fit that he will, on an ideological level, feel distinctly uncomfortable with this whole idea. But also, one of the reasons why this word will die out, and I'm sorry, darling, but it will go. It will die out eventually, and it will go quicker than we think, is because, as McCullum himself alluded to, it does kind of cheapen and kind of commodify in a very easy media sort of way what is actually a very interesting and daring and imaginative yet still authentic way of playing modern Test cricket. So I get where Elgar's coming from, and I like where Elgar's coming from, and it gives a bit of extra spice to it because it's an ideological question. How do you win games of cricket? Well, this is what we'll see over the next 5 weeks. We'll see 2 teams doing things in markedly different ways. And one will come out of it emboldened and the other one will come out of it slightly embarrassed. But it's going to be one hell of a watch, come what may.
It's kind of actually given the series a bit of build-up. I've kind of the series kind of just appeared on me. You know, someone last week was, are you going to be at Lords next week? And I was like, what's going on at Lords next week?
That's a reflection of your personal relationship with the game as much as anything else.
Yeah, I mean, a bit. But I also think this, we've just had a month of constant white ball stuff, and you kind of forgot about the actual Bazball. So nice that it's back.
There's been some understandable frustration that there's not been some real meaty red ball international cricket to get our teeth into in the height of summer, and I understand that frustration. But as I said a couple of weeks ago, I don't mind that little interregnum between one and the other. That we can all have a bit of a breather. We can build up to it, and now we can feel legitimately, rather than we're just on this endless carousel, we can feel like we are now building to the rightful finale of the summer. In brackets, the Ashes next year will be done by last week. The full 5 tests will be done by last week this time next year, which is another issue tied into so many other issues, of course. But for the here and now, mid-August going into early September, 3 test matches against 2 very, very different but kind of complementary cricket teams on 3 good tracks as well. And I think we should probably have a chat about what you can expect from each ground over this test series. My appetite is distinctly whetted going into it.
Yeah. The last thing, this might be the last time we say Bazball on the podcast, is that I have slightly limited sympathy for Key and McCullum saying, we don't like this term people have come up with, when they've also gone out and labelled Stuart Broad the Nighthawk. I think you either like silly terms or you don't. And you can either say, we're not doing anything new, or you can promote Stuart Broad to try and pinch it in a chase of 500 or whatever. I don't know if they get to have it both ways. But anyway.
It is reductive though, isn't it?
Sure. Yeah. Yes. No. I mean, it doesn't capture...
There's one side kind of, plumping up Stuart Broad's ever delightful plumage, and there's another thing reducing this whole ideology to one cute little Andrew Millerism who has a lot to answer for.
Yes, fair enough. It probably doesn't help South Africa's case that they got New Englanded, let's say, by the Lions in a warm-up game last week. After conceding 433, the Lions responded with 672, with 90 odds for Dan Lawrence and Sam Billings and hundreds for Harry Brook and Ben Duckett, before Ollie Robinson ran through the top order and Derbyshire's Sam Connors completed an innings win. Billings, the captain of that game, was in punch form afterwards. Said, this was in response to Elgar's comments, said, we've beaten an international team over 4 days by an innings in a manner of scoring 5.74 and over. You'd be pretty stupid to ignore that, if I'm honest. If that's not a wake-up call, because we're not even the best 11. So it's up to them, really, but I think that's a pretty strong statement. It should be said that South Africa weren't full strength as well, without Nortje, Ngidi and Rabada, although first choice spinner Keshav Maharaj did get an absolute pasting.
No harmer either, right?
Yeah, no harmer. Going nearly 8 and over, Maharaj did. But yeah, so they wasn't the attack that we'll see next week. And so it's kind of hard to work out how good they are, Cam. How much of a challenge will they pose, do you think?
I mean, long live Bazball. What everything needs a name.
That's the last one.
Have a name. You go.
No, I just had an aside before you got into that. Sorry, you're going to have to... It's been a nightmare editing this. But it is, yeah, sure, it's a bit reductive. But for the person who kind of tunes into the odd test match and it might follow the game through a scorecard, it comes across like, let's just go out there and smash it. So it is fair to kind of call it that, right?
It's everything falling under one church. It's just, rather than having a fancy name, it's 2 syllables called Bazball. Like that's it.
Are we still doing more on this? Answer the question about South Africa's chances in the upcoming series.
Yeah.
I mean, I agree in that. I'm really looking forward to the series, and that I kind of picture Dean Elgar as this guy who bemoans the fact that like the cane's not allowed in school anymore. It's old school, like hard-nosed, testosterone-fueled cricket versus England's kind of like kumbaya cricket, and we'll find out who wins at the end of it. I think South Africa are going to be really nervous about how Maharaj went, like England's B team. I think he went 1 for 168 off 22 overs, and that's loads. That's loads of runs. And Phil made an excellent point earlier off air, whether that helps or hinders kind of Simon Harmer's chances of playing. Does it mean that Maharaj needs a bit of help with a second spinner, or does it go, actually, spin's not the option to go with here, and we'll just stick with one?
Yeah, let's get into South Africa's lineup. We'll do England in a bit, but South Africa's, I think the makeup of their team is more interesting because they haven't played in a little while. England's team is quite settled. There are a few questions about South Africa. Let's do Harmer first. Phil, will he play? Should he play?
I think if they're feeling really daring, they will pick him. I think there's more chance that he plays at Old Trafford and possibly at the Oval, but certainly at Old Trafford than there is at Lord's. The problem is that they do not have an effective batting all-rounder to fulfil that fifth bowling role. And so they would... the composition of their team is complex, and Harmer obviously is a titan of English cricket, English red ball cricket, and we all know that. And they will be wanting, you would imagine, to find a way to get him in there. But however you juggle that lineup, that mid to lower order, however you juggle it, you're lacking a little bit. You're either lacking a little bit in the bowling stocks, in the pace bowling stocks, if you play both spinners, and you're lacking undoubtedly with the kind of that mid to lower order. You need strength in depth there, especially against England, because England have a strong mid to lower order themselves. And South Africa don't really have that option. They are looking at possibly playing Jansen, who is a bowling, not even a bowling all-rounder. He's a bowler who bats usefully. He's a 6'8" left arm seamer. He's nowhere near a test number 7, and yet it's looking like if they were to get Harmer in, they may have to play him at 7, and they may play their keeper at 6. Verian, play him at 6, play Jansen at 7. That is an incredibly long tail, with Harmer then at 8. So they may play it safe, take Harmer out, bat Jansen at 8, so you can play 3 seamers plus Maharaj. Maharaj will always play. He's their premier spinner, and he's done very well, by the way. He was smashed out of the attack in that game against the Lions, but he did well, not just away from home over the winter just gone, but he did okay in South Africa as well.
It was against Bangladesh, where him and
against
Harmer
Bangladesh,
both
but
played.
he did very well, albeit on late summer South African pitches that turn a lot. But Maharaj plays come what may. It's a really difficult decision for them. My instinct is that Harmer won't play, that they'll bat Jansen at 8, the keeper at 7, and bring in an extra batsman. That's my instinct, because that's kind of the safer way of going. And at Lords as well, with a bit of rain. I mean, we'll get a result, I'm pretty sure, but a bit of rain around, slightly more temperate than it's been up until now, albeit the pitch will probably still be relatively dry. But my instinct is that if Harmer plays, he probably comes into the second test. From a spectacle perspective, I would like to see Harmer play. I would like to see them try and back themselves, find some form in the top 6 without having to worry too much about that mid to lower order. But it's traditionally not really the South African way to throw the cards in the air and hope that they land. But then, maybe in a 3-test shootout against a team that's going to be coming at you hard and trying to hit you hard, they might just think, all right, well, we'll bring in a player of that kind of caliber. Harmer's never played a test match, obviously, in England. He's played 7 test matches in his whole career across 6 years, and yet he's a giant of the English game. So it will be really interesting to see which way they decide to go.
I think the context of Harmer playing is really appealing to us as like English cricket fans, because he's been such a giant of the domestic game, to kind of give a bit of context to everything we've seen in the recent years, where we go, okay, this guy's been ripping through the county game. No one can play him. How does he go against the kind of the best of English batters, basically? So that's something I think when I think to myself, I want him to play, is that's not really for any tactical purposes, or do I necessarily think it's the best way for South Africa to go? It's because I'm interested. I'm interested to see what happens.
And he is too, by the way. I mean, I've interviewed him a number of times, and he says, well, I think I'm the best finger spinner in the world, but how can I ever say that unless I've played 60 test matches? And he is absolutely desperate to play. In a different era, they'd play him, I think, in as much as they would have enough faith in their top and middle order, so they wouldn't need to worry too much about who's batting 7, 8, 9. But in this side, where there are little question marks against a number of players' positions from top to bottom, really, it would be a big gamble for them to play 5 bowlers, of which 2 are spinners, at Lords in the first test match.
In terms of balance, it probably it just doesn't work, like you were saying, in a different era. You're thinking of Jack Callis, basically, right?
Yeah, but you're right. But also quality around them as well. Yeah. At the moment, they've got an unproven number 3, an unproven opening bat, etc., etc.
But it would be, and again, this is I'm saying out of a sort of a perspective of curiosity rather than this is the sound tactical move. England's approach with the bat against New Zealand, where they kind of attack the spinners well. They faced off against Michael Bracewell in those 2 tests, and it worked. But he's a guy who'd only just started bowling in professional cricket a couple of years earlier. Maharaj and Harmer, completely different perspective. I mean, and so that would be the weather works in their favour. it would be appealing to see, Maharaj sure we got a hit in the warm-up game, but to watch those two try and, to watch England try and attack two spinners with that many first-class wickets between them, I mean, that would be a proper test rather than the one that England had against New Zealand. Where...
I think you're bang on. I think it's probably there's more chance of South Africa winning the Test series with Simon Harmer in their team, but their traditions are such that they play attritional cricket and that they sit in games. Well, I guess the add-on to that point is that the game is careering away from those traditions, and so perhaps they will feel like we need to eyeball England. In which case, you play your gun spinner, even if it is at Lord's.
Yeah, and I guess there's a few things I'd just add on Janssen that we've mentioned. I think I personally agree that he looks a bit high at number 7, but South Africa clearly really rate him, and they have picked him as a number 7 in the past, so they clearly don't see it as quite an impossible thing. So they would see that as an option. I think having him
it was in that one-off game, the second Test match, right, against India. I think so, they picked him at 7. And you're right, what you say, they do rate him, and he's clearly a very good cricketer. His first-class record isn't very good yet with the bat, but he is young and obviously massive space for him to improve. But that Test match that you talk of, they were 1 down in that series already, and so they had to play desperate cricket.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
they were 1 down against the best team in the world. Going into this series, at Lord's as well, it's just a big call. It's a big call. I'd love to see it.
The other thing I'd say is that if South Africa have, they say they're ignoring how England have gone about it completely. If they have looked at it, they'll notice that England have basically been even on the first innings and then chased loads in the fourth innings. And so you might well want another fourth innings weapon,
right?
I suppose.
So just very, I know we don't want to turn this into whether Simon Harmer plays at 8 or not, but it's been interesting to see how the English counties have tried to go at him in a way that they've never done before. It could have an echo of what the Test team's doing, maybe, I don't know. But they have tried to attack him. Hampshire tried to attack him, and they had a bit of success against them, even in the fourth innings. He got them in the end. Same with Surrey as well. Here, they went after Simon Harmer, Surrey. So this is a new approach to try and manage the unmanageable. If he were to play, as I say, England would go after him. It would open up South Africa's chances to win the game more, but it would also potentially open them up to get stuffed.
Yeah, nice. 10 minutes on a player who I think we all agree probably won't play. That's good. Final thing on South Africa, just for the moment. We talked a bit about their batters. It looks like it will be Elgar, Sarel Irvi and Keegan Peaton in the top 3. But Cam, you think there's probably a shootout for the 4 and 5 spots at the moment as it stands? So
Firdous Munda at Cricinfo, she's a South African correspondent, been reporting on it, and basically been saying it's 4 into 2 of Van der Dussen, Aidan Markram, Ryan Rickleton and Kaya Zondo. And it just seems like it is one of those selections where there is South African kind of politics and history wrapped up in the selection. Kaya Zondo has had a fantastic domestic season, scored a double century, averaged about 70. He scored 80 against the Lions, and so he's really pressed his case. He was also the kind of catalyst for the SJN hearings. That's just been happening recently, and was a very public figure within that. And so now, in the aftermath of that, there's a feeling of, okay, if this guy plays, it's South Africa moving forward in a more progressive way. But there also becomes the pressure of everything attached to that. Similarly, if it's flipped and he's not picked, is the idea of South Africa going back on it, and has things not been learnt. She writes very well on it, and far better than I can explain it briefly. But it's both a kind of fitting 4 into 2 and kind of all the political ramifications that thereby follow. So stuff to consider on and off the pitch.
Yeah, well summed up. It's a tricky one. Obviously, it's probably worth explaining to the listeners that South Africa have a requirement to select, on average, 6 non-white players across all of their formats across every 12-month period. So if you see fewer than 6 at Lords, they're not going against their quota system or their requirements. But the selectors, it's a terribly tricky job, and you have to manage this over the course of 12 months. The lad in question, he's 32 years old. He doesn't have a particularly strong record if you look at it in bold stats, but you're right. He had a very, very good winter just gone. They missed Bavuma, right? Bavuma would be a stick on at 5. He doesn't make many hundreds, but he makes a lot of important runs, a lot of important contributions, and he's now a very key part of their management setup. So missing him with injury for the whole series is a really big blow. For what it's worth, Markram, I've always thought he's a good player, but he never seems to get any runs. He always sets up nicely, always looks good. He looked okay in the one day as he made a couple of scores. And Van der Dusen obviously did very well in the one day, as he doesn't have much of a test record to speak of, but he always looks again like a pretty tidy player. So it would be really, really interesting to see which way they go. I have a few concerns about Peterson at 3. He looked okay, I thought, against
I love it.
India. Yeah, I thought he looked okay against India, but he's very, very wristy, and he's very inexperienced in English conditions. He didn't do great at Durham when he came in and batted 3 there. He's good to watch, and I'd like to be proved wrong because I really want to see a competitive series, but I have a few concerns about him at 3.
And just you
especially at Lords.
You quite like Ryan Rickleton as well, don't you, Phil?
Well, I mean, he has a really good record for Northants. He tore it up, averaged 75 for Northants, and he keeps as well. But they want to go with the keeper that they've brought in post de Kock, and he's done okay. Rickleton looks like a very good player to me, and maybe in the fullness of time he might end up being the keeper bat, but I think it's a bit early for him now. He'll probably miss out, especially as I think he got a first baller in the Lions game.
Cool.
Bavuma is kind of the type of player who kind of suits the rhythms of kind of Test cricket in this country. In terms of kind of recent years, where you're not getting, both teams aren't putting up big scores, but it comes down to sort of that kind of key middle order 70 or 80. He's a guy who still only has 1 Test century, which is kind of hard to believe. But he's kind of the big loss. He's kind of the, despite the kind of bank of big scores, he's averaged, I think, close to 50 over the last couple of years. And he was kind of what swayed it for me in terms of kind of when I was making a series prediction for the magazine a few weeks ago. So that is kind of, that's.
I always think Bavuma is like the kind of Test club cricketer. And there's that saying, it's like, 80s aren't used to anyone. They're not winning. Well, they are. They're quite helpful. They're much more helpful than 10. And Bavuma's just there, being just a constant source of runs. He hasn't necessarily been a match winner, but he's been like a series definer, if that makes sense. His output over time kind of gives him his value.
Yeah. Let's move on to England, and I spoke to Mark Butcher about what this series could mean for a few of the individuals in the side. Hi Butch, we recorded last week ahead of the England Lions game against South Africa, when basically everyone sort of on the fringe on the Test side, it looked like, made runs. You had big runs for Lawrence, Billings, Brooke and Duckett. Obviously none of those are going to really push to play in that first Test, but the question I wanted to ask is, how does that kind of like affect the mindset of, let's start with Zach Crawley, who we haven't talked about for at least 2 weeks on the podcast. Obviously, he's going to play. He's got England's full backing, even though he's struggled to runs between the last Test series and now. My question is sort of, firstly, how long does he get? But also, what is the mindset like of a player in that sort of situation when you look and everyone else is getting runs and you sort of can't get it away and you're sort of playing, but maybe you're wondering, what do I need to do to score runs? How long am I going to get? That sort of thing. What will be going through his head, and also just how much can we trust England saying, look, we back Crawley to the hilt, he plays no matter what, sort of thing?
He needs to score some runs. There's no doubt about it. For his own sanity, he needs to score some runs. The fact that he's gone away to the 100 and he scored none. He scored none in the Championship, scored none in the lead up to the Test series. He's made 40 was his highest score, wasn't it, in the run chase at Edgbaston. For his own mental health, he has to score runs, whether they back him to the hilt or not. And it gets to the point where should he fail again at Lords, that the kind of thing to do is to leave him out. The backing thing is all well and good, but it gets to a point where you're damaging the player more than you're helping him by keep pushing him out the door and into the bright lights. So supporters of Crawley will be fingers crossed that he makes a significant contribution at Lords. Those that would like to see him gone and never return will be hoping that the status quo continues and that some of the other hopefuls get a chance. I suppose the only issue with that is that the hopefuls that are making all the runs are not opening batters. So in terms of you asked about sort of like the threat from the guy scoring lots of runs elsewhere. Well, that hasn't necessarily been one for people that would be challenging for his place. But that doesn't alter the fact that it's been a run scoring summer, and England's opening batter at the moment hasn't joined the party at all. So I think that's where we are. I mean, I think that there comes a time when you have to take all of the assurances and whatever with a little bit of a pinch of salt, because the player himself and those in the dressing room will be desperate for him to succeed. But if he doesn't, it then becomes almost like a mercy killing to take him out of there and give somebody else a go.
Yeah, and you're right in saying that the players that made runs aren't obvious opening options, and it almost feels like with some of them, I guess especially with Harry Brook, you're almost getting to the point where you're having to almost figure out a way to fit him in rather than like waiting for a slot to become available. And so I guess related to that is the question of how convinced are we by Ollie Pope at number 3 right now? I mean, obviously he starts the series, but I mean, and he got that really good 100 against New Zealand, but he's also, I think he's averaging mid-30s for the summer, I think. It's not as if, I mean, it's a tricky one, I guess. Are we going to have to have that decision soon, I suppose?
The issue with Crawley is Ollie Pope is not the solution to the issue with Crawley. So we'll treat them as the separate things that they are. If Harry Brook is going to play, the only place for him in the batting lineup that is free at the moment, unless suddenly he's going to turn into a Test match opening batter, which I would suggest is probably not a great way to start your Test match career, batting in such a specialist position, which is such a long way away from what you do normally. And so it is the number 3 spot, for sure. I mean, he's not going to bat 4, that's Joe Root's position. He's not going to bat 5, that's Johnny Bairstow's position, and he's not going to bat 6 because the captain's there. So that would be the obvious spot. However, I suppose you look at it and go, well, if they've given a bloke who hasn't made 100 this summer in Test match cricket, hasn't made 50 in Test match cricket, all of the assurances in the world that he's going to play, then you would imagine the same would apply to Ollie Pope. So at the moment, Brook is on the outside looking in, and hoping for a change of heart around something, around the backing of the players that are playing, or heaven forbid an injury to somebody else, and then he comes and takes his chance because he's certainly ready for it.
Mm-hmm. And then just on Pope himself, I mean, as far as selection goes, I agree. I think he probably gets the summer. But are you convinced, I guess, from a technical standpoint, I mean, and from everything else, that he has the things for Test match number 3? Have we seen that this summer, do you think?
No, not yet. No, but again, he made 100 batting there, out of position, somewhere that he never bats. So he's got something, hasn't he? And there is still that sort of skittishness about his play, particularly when he first gets to the crease, and but if the backing, again, the backing for him is the same as it is for Crawley, then he's not in the position, as far as I'm concerned, yet whereby he needs to be withdrawn for his own good. Yeah. And we'll see, won't we? He gets another 3 Test matches here. High summer. We've had blistering weather. The pitches should be decent. Although my fear is that when we get lots of hot weather, and that might change over the course of this week. In fact, it looks almost certain to. That the balance between how much water is put into the surfaces, and then how much rolling is done and whatever, and then how the pitches come out after that, is always a little bit of a worry. They tend, particularly after the outfields have been sand based and whatever, they tend to turn out to be very crusty and therefore not necessarily that easy for batting on. We talk about sort of the green ones and the nibblers and the things at the beginning of the season. We didn't see many of those. But then you get to the back end of the season where you think, well, the sun's been out, they should be great for batting, and the spinners should have a good time. The spinners will have a good time, I think. Simon Harmer's going to enjoy himself. But then you also think that you might end up in a situation where the ball holds quite a bit, and it becomes quite difficult to play your strokes freely. So fingers crossed that the groundsman at Lords managed to navigate all of those different and difficult variables and produce something that's worthy of the occasion.
Yeah, it's a good point, actually. I mean, you talked about ground staff before on this show, and this will just be an absolutely new challenge for quite a lot of them. Like, they've never had to prepare a heat when it has been this hot in the build-up, because it has been so freakishly warm, basically, and how they go about doing that. I mean, I kind of wouldn't be surprised if kind of any sort of surface comes out, because, you get either overcompensation, which would be understandable, or they kind of do their normal thing and it becomes like a sort of a baked flat one. It'll be kind of quite fascinating to see, I guess.
Yeah, well, I don't know. The thing is, I don't think it'll be flat. That's my concern. I mean, if it turns out to be a flat one, then fine. In the old days, the pitches at Lords used to get quicker as they went along. They didn't necessarily do much more. They didn't break up, but they used to sort of really carry through, and scoring rates got faster. The evidence of the pitches that I've seen and the games that I've seen at Lords this year is that they haven't been like that at all. They've been actually quite difficult to score freely on. And as I've said, the sort of if the balance between the water added and the rolling and whatever else isn't quite right, then you end up with something whereby the ball holds and grips a lot, and makes batting less than straightforward. So we shall see. Look, I'm no expert on these things, but I've played on enough of them and watched enough to know what can happen, given the weather we've had. It isn't like Australia, whereby you hot sunshine, water, roll, bake in the sun. It compacts and becomes like concrete for 2 or 3 days, and then break. Then you get the big linear cracks, and it breaks up, and anything can happen. Up and down movement at pace, or big turn out of the rough. Ours don't react like that. It's not. The soil is completely different, so it's a different kettle of fish when we get hot weather.
There were 2 bowlers in that Lions game who were in the Test squad who stood out. So Overton took 5 for in the first innings. I guess you'd be surprised if he leapfrogged anyone to get into that first Test 11. But Ollie Robinson took a really important 3 for in the second innings. I think he bowled Dean Elgar with the second ball of that innings. Sam Billings was talking about how fit he seemed. Someone who was the Lions captain that game, saying that he, his fourth spell was as quick as his first spell. If England are fully convinced of his fitness, how close does he become to getting into that first choice Test team, or do they give it 1 more game or 2 more games?
Yeah, I don't think he is that close, to be honest with you, because I think he's a replacement for one of Anderson and Broad. Do you see what I mean? I don't think that all 3 of them play. Presuming that Stokes can play a relatively full part as fourth seamer, Potts has done more than enough to warrant his place in the side. Anderson and Broad are both playing because they've been backed to do so by the management. I think that's absolutely right. And therefore he doesn't quite make it in. And look, I mean, you look at it couldn't be a more English bowling lineup, could it really? Whichever one of the 3 seamers play plus Stokes, you've got sort of mid to low 80s seam and swing bowlers, right arm, and that's not selectors' fault or anything like that. That's the fitness of the extreme pace guys that are knocking around. None of them are able to get on the park, so they're very, very fine bowlers, all 4 of them. But you do think to yourself, well, given whatever set of circumstances, losing the toss and a blistering hot day and a flat deck, you're thinking, wow, it could be hard work. A lot of work for Jack Leach, regardless, I think, over the course of this. But I think Robinson in the squad, he will make an appearance at some point, because the conditions have a chance of being relatively brutal, with or without the impending thunderstorms.
Yeah, that's interesting, because I'm just curious how that's kind of happened, I guess, because it felt like the consensus was maybe towards the end of the Ashes series, before the fitness and injury concerns for Robinson really loomed their head, that he was perhaps edging ahead of Broad in that queue. I mean, he played the first Test ahead of him. He obviously had a much better record than Broad. Well, Broad was injured for a bit, but he had a brilliant record in that first year. Broad has not set the world on fire. I mean, he's not been awful by any means, but he's not set the world on fire since coming back into the team this summer. But you think he's still ahead of him, just kind of because he's Stuart Broad and because we know what he can do, sort of thing?
Yeah, I think so. And again, I'll put an old record on of mine. I was so frustrated that neither, in particular, that Stuart didn't go to the West Indies, because as I said before, I think they should have taken him and they should have played him, and that potentially he would have retired if he'd gone there. The first 2 Test matches would have done for him. Now he's back in the team. He's a senior player. He deserves the pick. And for now, he's in the team. That might not be the case by the time we get to the 3rd Test match. But for now, yeah, absolutely. And Ollie Robinson will have to wait his turn. There's no way that Anderson and Broad and perhaps even Potts, are going to make it through 3 more back-to-back Test matches, despite the fact that they've had the time off. And so it's very much a squad, a bowling squad that has been picked, and I expect they will all play their part over the course of 3 matches.
Yeah. So final things on the Test series. How do you actually see it going? I mean, South Africa obviously beaten in that Lions game, but that wasn't a first choice attack by any means. There's been some quite bullish remarks from both camps ahead of this series about whether England's new style will come a cropper against South Africa. How do you see it going?
Well, I mean, always difficult to back against England at home, and even more difficult given what they've done already over the course of the summer. Going to be a niggly old series, I think. I'm not sure that there's going to be a great deal of love lost between the two teams along the way, just from reading the opening comments before anything's happened. And they always tend to be quite spicy, England South Africa series, particularly over here. So I think I'm going to back England to win it. I think that South Africa are going to be very, very tough. I think, watching somebody like Anrich Nortje, if Nortje and Jansen both end up in the team, that's a huge, huge test for England's batters. And of course, Simon Harmer is an addition, is a weapon that South Africa haven't really had in the Test match teams, which is a high class spin bowler. Which is not to say that the various people who've held the role as sort of South Africa's slow bowlers over the years haven't been good. It's just that this guy is a proven wicket taker, and he brings a little bit of something extra, I think, to their lineup. So that's going to be really interesting. I cannot tell you how much I'm looking forward to it. It's been great to be around sort of on the 100 and watching all the white ball stuff. But having had a break, having had enough time to sort of build up some anticipation ahead of another Test match series, it means that it's very much looking forward to it, and I'd want the weather not to spoil it.
And so, final thing. So just before we started recording last week, the news broke that former international umpire Rudi Koertzen had passed away. Sort of a figure in so many moments in cricket's history. He was the umpire that knocked the bails off the end of 2005 Ashes, and loads more besides. A sort of legendary umpire in the game. You'd have played in games that he umpired in. What are your memories of him? It's been just basically a universal outpouring of affection, it seems like.
Yeah. He was a terrific guy. I mean, what you want from your umpires, clearly, first and foremost, is they get decisions right. And he straddled the pre and post DRS eras. But you also need a little bit of humanity from them and a bit of a sense of humour. I think the very best umpires are those that see the players and see the game as things to be enjoyed. And yes, they have to be in charge, but there is a way of being in charge. And I think he had exactly the right sort of balance between, don't mess with me. This is you're on my turf, but also that this is great fun, and we can all see the funny side of a lot of things. And when umpires have that manner and demeanour about them, you forgive them their glitches more readily than those perhaps who are a little bit less welcoming to the human side of the game. And off the field, he was a lot of fun too. He'd always to be found propping up the bar, and he'd buy you a drink, and you'd have a chat about the world and everything else. And he was just a really good guy, really nice fella. The legacy of the slow death, the long slow finger coming up, will be I'm sure copied around the place. It's a really sad news. Really sad news.
Yeah, there were two things I clock this week on that. So there was one that was a video doing the rounds of Ntini appealing for LBW against Justin Langer, and Koertzen starts going for the slow finger raise and then turns it into a just going down the leg side, which amused everyone. And there was also, because he was the umpire who incorrectly gave out Sangakkara for 192 at Hobart when he was sort of playing one of the great innings. Sangakkara walks off, obviously fuming, but it was the aftermath of that where Koertzen had since said that he watched it back, realised he'd made an error, went and said to Sangakkara, I'm so sorry, I thought it was bat then shoulder, it turns out it was shoulder then helmet, I've got that wrong, I'm really sorry, mate. And then Sangakkara posted a really nice tribute to him, which is just nice, and I think shows how that humility that you mentioned and that humour kind of comes through.
Absolutely.
Umpire.
Yeah, great, and that's it. Everybody, we all make mistakes. Players, perhaps more than umpires. Well, not perhaps, definitely. And there's nothing wrong with. I think it happened yesterday. Actually, I think Graham Lloyd, young Bumble, made an error with gave a wide to a ball that I think might have hit the bat or hit something on the way through, and it kind of. There was no flashpoint because he thought, hang on, there was something not quite right there. He checked with his partner at square leg, which I wish umpires would do a lot more. What do you think? He said, no, I think there was something on that, definitely. And he crossed his arms and changed the decision, and the game goes on. There is absolutely nothing wrong with that. With holding your hands up and saying, look, none of us are perfect, and Rudi was the best of them because he understood that as well as anybody.
Yeah, well. Cheers, Birch. Thanks loads for your time. Taha, Mark and I spoke about Crawley, who will obviously definitely open against Africa. But if you had to pick two players, who would you predict will be opening for England in the first test in Pakistan this winter?
Put on the spot there, Chief.
I told him it was coming, to be fair. So he's had time to think about it.
I mean...
And is the question who we think will or who we would like to see?
Who we think will, I think.
Mm.
Yeah. Because, who we think will, that's the question.
Okay, I like it.
Well, they've showed so much faith in the two guys up the top right now. I mean, I could still see them potentially opening in Pakistan. I know it kind of doesn't fit in with how it's been for the last few years, where it's just impossible to string together the same opening partnership for, more than a couple of series. But they might just back them again more. Lee's has obviously done pretty well. Crawley, the record doesn't look great. The argument is sound not to pick him, and yet in the last innings of that India test, he suddenly looked that player again, where he looked like he was being disciplined, like he wasn't gonna, he was watchful to begin with, and then as he's kind of seen off the new ball, then he started to play his shots, and so he will continue to give that sort of that sense of hope that maybe there's an innings where it all comes together again for him, simply because they've shown so much faith in them right now, I can still see them opening in Pakistan.
I don't know what the pairing might be, but I think Keaton Jennings is actually a lot closer than people realise. He got selected for the England Lions again. He's got a reputation for being an excellent player of spin when you're going over to Pakistan for 3 tests. I also think England really want to stick with the pair at the moment, and if, say, Crawley fails for another 3 test matches, I don't think they're ready for like another long-term relationship with an opener. I don't think they know who they want that to be. There's a lot of people competing for it, but there's no one which is standing out as the obvious next cab of the rank. And so if you can have Keaton Jennings as like a stopgap kind of fling, I think that works for all parties involved.
With the Jennings thing, obviously he has this reputation of playing really well in the subcontinent. I mean, the numbers stack up, but I think people also need to note that Pakistan is a very different place to India and Sri Lanka. Spin really didn't play much of a role in the series against Australia. It was all about quicks with reverse swing at high pace, and that will be the kind of the key challenge. So I don't really know much about Jennings in that.
He's left-handed and he can reverse sweep.
Yeah,
get him in.
He gave a good interview to you for the current issue of the magazine, in which he outlined a few of the technical changes, advancements that he's introduced to his game. He he says there's a lot better rhythm to his game. He'd become very mechanical in his early iterations as a Test match player, and wasn't able to adjust to the late swinging delivery, albeit one or two of them were absolute jaffers. I mean, he got stitched up by a Bumrah with one of those all-time breakbacks into his inside knee, the inside of his knee. I think he's a different player now. He hit triple hundred, didn't he? He's hit double hundred as well in recent times. He's a good player, and he's a good bloke. Stokes likes him. They're good friends from Durham years as well. I wouldn't be surprised if he's in the squad at least for Pakistan, regardless of how these two go.
And he can play shots. He's kind of actually people don't talk about it enough, but he's
good white ball player, isn't he?
He's a very good white ball player. I was actually kind of surprised that he's not been anywhere close to a 100 deal or anything like that. But good record across formats for Lancashire.
I would just add on the idea that you're now undroppable. Doesn't matter what you've done. I don't think that's the reality. I think Zach Crawley is playing for his Test career, but I don't think he has to do an enormous amount. I think if he can change the tone and tempo of a session or two, that's what they're after. That's what they're looking for from their opening bat. McCullum said this quite clearly, which is when you hear it from a coach, an extraordinary thing to say. But he said we don't expect him to be consistent. That's not really why he's there. He's not out there to sort of churn and suffocate a bowling attack. He's out there to change a game over an hour or two. Now, I'm not saying that his 45 or 40-something in the chase against India was the defining knock of that chase by any means. But it did illustrate what they're after from him. He also did it in the first Test match of the summer as well. Now, 240s clearly don't make a career. And if he continues to pockmark the odd suggestion of being a player with blobs and binary scores, then your time will be up. And it doesn't matter how liberal and open and cosseted you are within that new setup. You've got to go in the end. So he is playing for his career. But as I say, I don't think he needs to do anything dramatic to be kept in there. Answer to your question, I actually think that, for what it's worth, I think that Crawley has more longevity as a Test cricketer than Alex Lees does, personally. I can see them both playing in Pakistan. I can see neither of them playing in Pakistan. I think we've got to get away from this idea that it's this closed shop and a buddy network. It doesn't matter how good or otherwise you are. You'll always be in that side. I don't think it's going to play out like that.
You actually didn't answer the question, but that's fine.
James Vince, I can see featuring somewhere in the top 3 for the England cricket team again, and I can absolutely see Jennings in those conditions getting the nod. I don't think there are any other obvious opening bat candidates. Hasib Hamid, we talked about, not yet.
Yeah.
Not against the real quicks in Pakistan, but come the start of next summer, you never know. He's done very well.
It was interesting that Duckett batted at number 5 in that Lions game because he bats 3 for Notts. He's got a really, really good record over the last few years. Actually, he's got one of the highest first-class averages in the country. And he also does play with that tempo that they like and is clearly just an improved player as well. So I don't know if they see him as an opening option, considering he came in the middle order then.
It's a good question, that, because I looked at that order and I saw that Lawrence was at 3. Lawrence obviously batted 3 for England against India once, but he's not a 3 by tradition. Maybe it's simply a hierarchy thing that they thought, Lawrence, you're the last man out of the team, so we'll put you in the gun position at 3. Or maybe they think if there is a way for that lad to get back into the side, then it possibly is in the 3 slot, either side of, well, with possibly Pope coming down in due course, down into 4 or 5, as he moves through his career. Or maybe it was just see who you got on the morning of the game and stick them in there. Duckett's an interesting name to throw into the mix, though. And again, obviously he's got experience of playing subcontinent cricket as well as a Test player. So we shall see.
On the complete sort of flip side to that, I mean, Sibley obviously got picked in this Lions squad. He struggled in that, when they went to Sri Lanka and India, he struggled, obviously. But when you look at that first Test in India, I think he got about 80-something odd there. And that was a pitch where that might be more akin to what you might see in Pakistan, where it is just a proper road. You'll have a bit of a threat. India started off with their quicks. He got through that. He'll have to get through the Pakistan quicks, and then there's a bit of spin to tackle with. And it would require
a real about turn, though, wouldn't it? With their ideology to go back to a player who, for all his developments technically in the last 12 months, with regards to Sibley, he is still an old-fashioned accumulator of an opener. And while we can think that there's absolute value in it, and England may yet think that there's value in it, there's been scant evidence that that's how they want their openers to play.
But I'm just saying this because he got picked in the Lions squad.
Sure,
So
sure.
there must be still some sort of kind of thinking there that he could be a part of it.
Yeah.
And he scored at a slight...
People will say, why haven't we
rate.
mentioned Rory Burns? That people will say that he started the season quite slowly, I thought, for Surrey, but he made a couple of scores in red ball cricket latterly. He looked okay, he looked a bit scratchy here and there still, but you know what you're going to get with him. Personally, I think if they're going to change their opening pair, then they will live a little, and I think they'll look at somebody else.
Okay. I want from each of you one area where the series will be won and lost, and a scoreline prediction. Let's make this reasonably snappy. Phil.
I think England will win the series 2-1. I'm even leaning to a 3-0 actually, but I put it 2-1 before, and I'll stick to that. The one coming from like a spectacular blowout, one session where it all goes horribly to pot and they can't cling it back somehow. You know, you can't keep doing it. You can't keep pulling rabbits out of the hat. So I think the one will come with a kind of hilarious collapse one afternoon. But I think England's middle order against South Africa's middle order will win the day. I think there'll be top order wickets on both sides. I think both teams will be looking at 70 for 4 one or two times across the series. But I think England at 5, 6, 7, 8-ish, 5, 6, 7, they're strong. I think Stokes is due. Stokes will have a big series with the bat, is my prediction. And I think South Africa's middle order, mid to lower order is as we've said, a tricky thing to figure out. So 2-1 England, and that's where they win it, in the guts of their middle order.
Cam, and slightly quicker than that, please.
I was distracted by Phil waving around antiseptic cream the whole time.
This is Germaline.
That's mine for my...
for your knee. Yeah, sure.
Anyway.
Said about that better.
I'd go. I'm going to go 2-1 either way, which is a bit of a fence sit. I basically think it'll be...
No, start again. You can't say that.
I can say that. If I give a good reason, I can say it.
2-1 either way.
Okay.
The reason being,
one team's going to do well, one team's not going to do well.
I think you've got two strong bowling attacks, one against a fragile batting lineup in England, the other against an unproven batting lineup in South Africa. It's going to be a shootout. I think we're going to have 3 results. I think the defining bit will be, as touched upon earlier, England's batters against South Africa's spinners. Do they go after them? Do they succeed in that, or do they all get out? 2-1 either way.
Fair enough. I'm going to let it slide, and I'm going to go to Taha.
Believe it or not, I wrote 2-1 in the magazine to England, pretty much for the same reasons he said. South Africa's batting lineup still just lacks a bit of stability. Quinton de Kock, still replaceable. He'll be playing in the 100 instead. Pace of Nortje, Rabada. What the New Zealand Test Series missed, what New Zealand missed, was someone bowling in the excess of 90 miles an hour. Matt Henry who's kind of, on average, he was the quickest, and he must have been bowling sort of kind of high 80s. No one was pushing 90 miles, going beyond 90 miles an hour, which is what Nortje will do. He's not played Test cricket for a while, so I'm quite excited to see him back. But yeah, I just think England I think they'll lose a test just because
they've got to at some point.
Yeah. But yeah, I think they've just got a bit more. And Robinson's back, which is kind of a boost to their bowling attack. They still kind of look light on reserves in that series against New Zealand.
Would you play Robinson at Lords in place of maybe Broad?
Yeah, I mean that's a pretty solid argument considering Broad's not had quietly not had a that great summer. But then who's going to be Nighthawk? Big question.
Yeah, they'll be sorely tempted to bring Robinson in. Did you talk about this with Butch?
We did briefly, yeah, but Butch was interestingly quite firmly on the Broad should play, and that Robinson is slightly down the pecking order at this point in time. And I see it. Well, I think England will pick Broad for that first test, but I think Robinson should be very close to playing because, before the fitness and injury concerns and issues, he was basically ahead of Broad in the pecking order. If England were picking a first choice attack for a must-win test, I think they would have gone Robinson over Broad at the start of the Ashes and halfway through the Ashes. And don't know why that would have changed now if they're fully convinced that Robinson is fit and firing.
Yeah, I hear all of that. My instinct is that they'll go with Broad. The occasion is something that, and it requires a bit of theatricality, and obviously he brings that. And I thought he was good on first days, much more than he was good on seconds, thirds, and fourths in the early part of the summer. He was very, very good. We were both at Leeds. He was excellent in that opening spell. He was probably the bowler of the day initially, among the seamers at least, at Leeds. He bowled well at Lords in the first test of the summer as well. I think he makes the cut just. But they will be tempted to bring Robinson back in, who has looked pretty fit and in good nick since he's come back from injury.
Right, let's do our bad news international cricket section, which is basically a weekly thing now. Trent Boult has been released from his New Zealand central contract, so he's not retired, but will be available significantly less, and he has specified that the reason why he's doing it is, at least in part, to play more domestic cricket, which means franchise T20 cricket essentially, which is entirely fair enough from his point of view. I mean, we don't know if he's played his last test, but we don't know that he definitely hasn't. Phil, you and I were both at Headingley to see that incredible new ball spell. Less Trent Boult is a bad thing for the international game, isn't it?
Unquestionably. I'd forgotten about that spell. It was one of the great spells. Clean bowled three England players. I think for the first time in about 100 years anyone had done it in first 3 wickets to fall in an opening spell. Look, this is the way that it's been for a while. But if you ignore his age, 33, and if you can sideline what he's done as an international career now for the best part of 8, 9, 10 years, which gives him the moral authority to walk away. If you ignore that, he's still a top class international cricketer. This is not an international cricketer who is waning, one who has given all that he has and can't really give any more in terms of quality, in terms of match affecting quality. He's not there. He's far from there. And so it's a real loss if we have seen the last of him as a New Zealand cricketer, undoubtedly. He's also a lovely bloke who's given everything he's got to the cause. And if you're a fast bowler in particular, then you look at those last 2 or 3 years of your time, and it would take a particularly selfless, almost martyr-like figure to not be tempted by the ever-increasing, expanding circus that passes for white ball franchise cricket. Shame, though.
I mean, I've just been trying to kind of feel not too down about it, trying to convince myself that he's 33, he's played a lot of cricket, he's kind of achieved a lot, and he's still not retired. Essentially, he's still available to play for New Zealand. If they pick him, but it's hard not to get existential about this and wonder what happens next and where the game goes and where the players that make international cricket great go. I mean, he's still probably, would you say he's probably the best left arm quick in the world? I mean, it's between him, Shaheen, Stark, but from what he's done across all 3 formats for a long period of time, you could make the case that he's number one, and we won't get to see him play international cricket anymore. But we once in a while potentially, but there are no guarantees now. And it's kind of made me think about, we spent all this time talking about the crisis of Test cricket, but it now becomes an argument about the crisis of international cricket and what does that mean to us.
We're reaching tipping point quickly. It's like we've been asleep at the wheel for a few years, and suddenly everybody's waking up to the reality here. But by the start of next year, you will have 4 teams with the IPL stamp. Sorry, 4 countries where that one IPL side will have been appearing across the course of next year. And with the UAE thing, which is overwhelmed by filthy money, Australian players in their prime are now looking at it and thinking, right, how can I extract myself from the irritations of the Australian season and my Australian contract and my BBL contract and so on, and how can I find a way into this? Trent Boult, because he's from New Zealand, has less there's less expectation because there's less money circling around New Zealand cricket. And so that they are more pragmatic about it, and they've had to be so for a number of years, like the same with the West Indies. But when you see the big boys also looking elsewhere, that's when you really start to realise that the whole social contract, the fabric of the thing, is fraying at the edges. And look, we need to do a whole show on all of this. And we also need to try and not do it from a position of despair either, because, you know, the world changes and good things remain within it. But yeah, it's an interesting time, to say the least, when we look at the carve up of the international game and what's left of it.
Yeah, so on that UAE league, it seems like David Warner, who had been reported that he was considering playing and missing the Big Bash, it seems like that is now not going to happen. But Chris Lynn, who is, if anything, more of a star of the Big Bash than David Warner is, even if he's not got the same international pulling power, he is signed up, I think, in a draft list, but he is yet to receive an NOC from Cricket Australia, and I think they might be reluctant to give him one, and that might be a story that could run and run. On that, so that's the UAE T20 League and South Africa T20 League. They both signed up lots of players. I'm not going to name them all. As Phil said, the IPL teams' brandings are all over, all of the teams, and it's been confirmed with the price brackets. These will essentially be the joint second most lucrative leagues in the world after the IPL. I mean, we've talked a lot about cricket's ecosystem, so obviously touching it, we don't need to get too much more into it. But if you were one of those that predicted that we're headed for an expanded IPL with lots of sub IPLs with Indian investment as dominating the schedule and the game, well, I guess this has been a good week for that prediction.
Sorry, I just want to say it's also just a very jarring thing to see, because you'll have players who play for these franchises in the South Africa League and then play for like a different IPL franchise when it comes to the IPL, and it's just like this constant, everything's in flux. There's no kind of, I mean, obviously we might be heading towards a system where an IPL team signs you up for 12 months, right? And you're basically part of those same teams.
Only a matter of time.
Yeah, but it's still also just this, you know, this is one of the things that makes me find it difficult to connect to these leagues where players are just going from one team to the next, and there's no kind of, there's no stability, and that's kind of the, in a way, the beauty of international cricket. You are part of that one setup.
So I've got kind of contrasting emotions to the UAE one and the South Africa one. The UAE one, yeah, been like, it's just Harlem Globetrotters stuff. It's like a circus, basically, of just all these players. Okay, it is what it is. South Africa, we spend a lot of our time talking about how the nations outside of England, Australia, and India need a financial boost. All this money that's in India needs to go to these nations to boost the game, to help spread it, to then, I hate this phrase, but give back, whatever. Is surely, if you're doing the Wisden Cricket podcast in South Africa, you go, this is actually probably quite a good thing for us. It's really going to boost the game here. And if that happens, I realise I'm kind of playing devil's advocate here without knowing if I actually agree with what I'm saying. If that then happens in the Caribbean as well, or Sri Lanka or whatever, and you have this kind of 9-month IPL type thing where players aren't hopping about, they're actually staying to the same team the whole time, then you do have that level of consistency, and you do have these regions where we've said they need money in the game, and they're getting it, and the IPL should pay me some cash, actually. I'm making an argument for them. But yeah, so I on one level I despair. On the other hand, this idea like that Trent Boult is this tipping point. I feel like if you're a West Indian fan, you're like, well, we're sad because we had 10 years of Trent Boult, but we've lost so many people before we even had those 10 years. Like, this has been going on.
Mm-hmm. And I wonder if what we'll see as well is possibly that these tournaments help perhaps South Africa cricket to survive and to continue to produce players, while leading to the increased irrelevance of, say, cricket South Africa. And if we see that, it's the same with cricket West Indies versus West Indian cricket. If you're, say, Mumbai Indians, and you know that you rely on this brilliant South African talent to be your overseas players, why not sort of cut out the middleman? You just have your Mumbai Indians sort of outpost there, and you're the centre for cricket in that area. You're the people that are going out saying, like, looking for the talent, bringing it through, having the youth systems there, and not then being beholden to these things. And if it's these owners then actually own the tournaments, you're the ones who are receiving more of the rewards that way as well. I could see that being a possible thing. Do you have one thing to say, Phil?
I do, actually.
Okay.
Sorry. It's a devilishly difficult problem, and your point is absolutely valid and good, and Cricket South Africa's financial horrors have at least been alleviated due to this deal with the IPL. But the knock-on effects, it doesn't take a genius to work out what the knock-on effects are. And if we ignore the mission creep of T20 cricket for a moment and just look at the impact that it's having on the South African national side, Neil Manthorpe, who is, he's like the boss of South African journalism, alongside with Firdousa, who you mentioned earlier. He's spoken to some of the South African players who are said to be devastated by the news that their 3-match ODI series against Australia has been binned as a consequence of this new T20 tournament. Now, that means that they're potentially sacrificing 30 points in the World Cup qualifying league, which will therefore mean that they'll have to play in Zimbabwe next summer to try and qualify for the World Cup. Now, as we know, in white ball cricket, anything can happen. So what we are really saying here is that Cricket South Africa, and this is not even a criticism of them, because you can only imagine what they're up against financially, trying to keep a dysfunctional system vaguely afloat, albeit there have also been many accusations of mismanagement. But they are faced with the prospect of financial oblivion or potentially weakening their chances of their national side appearing in the World Cup. Now, that is a brutal Sophie's choice of a situation. That is rock on a hard place stuff. Absolutely it is. But it still chills the bones when you think about the knock-on ramifications of this change. A change which now means that if you are an IPL player, you'll now be playing. If you are a Mumbai Indian, say if you're established Mumbai Indian player, then you'll be playing now for 5 months straight away. 5 months already now from next winter onwards. It's only going to expand, and the result of that will the other stuff, the stuff that we recognise, will contract. We have to find a way to accept that. And we need to talk about it more in depth and find solutions, I think.
Yeah.
Rather than just wring our hands and say, well, the world's changed and isn't it rubbish?
There was one
It's more complex than that.
There was one other interesting development this week, which is the BCI just sort of reiterating that their players and also the Indian sort of mentors, people who are still aligned to the BCI, are not allowed to play in these international tournaments or mentor in these international tournaments. And I wonder how long that will last for, if that will become a point of tension between these team owners and the BCI, because they're wanting to send, their young India player, say your Prithvi Shaw or your Ruturaj Gaikwad, who's not in the India side, but is clearly good enough to be an overseas player in one of these tournaments, and they want to go and get them some exposure and improve them, whether that becomes something. The other bit of, in some ways you might say this is good news that she feels able to make the decision, but also if she is missing international cricket, that will be a blow, is that Australia captain Meg Lanning is taking a break from the game. She says, after a busy couple of years, I've made the decision to take a step back, which enabled me to spend time focusing on myself. I'm grateful for the support of CA and my teammates, and ask that my privacy is respected during this time. Wish her the best, obviously.
Yeah, sure. There's nothing untoward about that.
No. But I guess it's just more that it just shows again the pressures and the weight of international cricket being played so much, even on women's players, and just that if the best batter there has been in the women's game is missing a substantial match of cricket, that is a bad thing for international cricket as a whole. Ideally, she comes back refreshed and everything else.
Yeah, I guess
it's not related to the T20 league stuff, obviously.
No, of course not. But I did read a couple of pieces around her short-term removal of herself from the game to recharge her batteries and take a break and so on. I don't know if it's indicative of that much, really. Mm-hmm. She's trod the boards for 10 years and more relentlessly. If she wants to have a few months just to have a breather before no doubt coming back, because she's cricket obsessed anyway and got a lot more still to achieve, I don't think that's necessarily reflective of the parlous state of scheduling again and all of that. In women's cricket in particular, they've been crying out to play more. Across COVID for a year and a half or a year or so, it was very difficult to find too many games of cricket, especially for the women, particularly for the women. So, yeah, sure, we wish her well, but I'm not sure there's that much to get too concerned about there.
Well, here's hoping. On to the 100. Lots of English players have made lots of very quick runs. We'll try and cover as many of them as we can. Let's start with Dab Milan, who has made an unbeaten 88 and 98 in his last 2 innings. Taha, he surely has to play the T20 World Cup. What does that mean when Ben Stokes comes back in, as it looks like he surely will?
Well, it kind of, if you look, if the plan is to have Stokes and to have him in the top 4, then you've got Butler obviously plays, Bairstow obviously plays, and then Stoke, and so it's just a shootout, right? Basically, it becomes between Roy and Milan, and right now they could, the contrast is stark. Roy, 2 ducks in a row, 3 ducks in 4 innings in the 100. This was kind of this had to be the tournament for him to be. Look, I've had a tough international summer, but now I'm going to hit some runs in the 100, and that will get him on the plane and get him in the side that starts the World Cup. But the way Milan's playing, and he's playing well, but also there's a good piece from one of the cricket viz analysts on our site about how Milan is kind of changed his game as well. Before, the criticism before, when he was obviously tearing up and averaging 50 in T20s for England, was that he was a slow starter, but that's kind of gone away now as well. He's starting quickly, so there's not that issue. He's not kind of holding back the side in any way, and so it's not looking good for Jason Roy. Basically, it's kind of hard to see how he fits into that starting 11 if he just continues the way he is right now. But also, when it comes to picking a World Cup squad, I think people forget that there aren't that many places for batters. You have to stock up on your bowling options because that's where you're going to rotate more. You kind of have a fixed batting lineup, and you might have the one reserve batter in that 15. And then when you look at Jason Roy, where else is he going to bat in that England side? He's a top order player. You might be looking at someone who's a bit more flexible, someone who can slot in up and down the order, where Phil Salt might become more of an appealing option because he's bad at 6 for England. Kind of very briefly, that is, obviously, but got a half century there in the Caribbean, and then can open, and that is where he's been in T20s. And so, it becomes a serious dilemma that we're getting to this point. The obviously upside is for Roy's perspective is still those 7 games of Pakistan, and whether they take him there, they have someone else that they have in mind as who can replace him, or obviously I've just talked what that kind of first choice top 4 could look like, where they try out both things and see what happens basically, and then make the call about the final squad.
If England were looking for another opener, they've got options. Wills, Jackson, Smead, both made hundreds this week, the first 2 in the competition's history since all that time ago when it began. They are both quite good, aren't they, Cam?
Oh yeah, it's like Taha said. Yeah, that's my insight today, that they are very good. It's like Taha was saying. It's not that if Roy wasn't scoring runs and there weren't all these other options, then you kind of carry on with your lives a little bit. But there aren't very many places, and it is another kind of 3-into-1 situation. I think one of the biggest problems Roy has at the moment is he cares about getting out in a T20 game. I remember speaking to a player before and being like, "Do you care when you get out in a 2020 match?" And he was like, "Well, kind of, but not really, because you can't. Like, you're going to play loads of them, and you're going to get out. That's the whole point in taking all these risks." And here, like 2 or 3 days ago, Roy got out, and it took so long for him to get off. The next ball had been bowled by the time he got into the changing room. And he walked in, it's a glass panel, so it's not exactly very private. And you see him, he whacked like something with his bat. And he goes into the changing room, you hear another massive bang, and you see like some Oval Invincible staffer walk out kind of sheepishly. Like, he looks really emotionally invested in each innings he plays. I think that's really dangerous if you're a T20 player, because the whole point is you've got to throw caution to the wind.
He is a world-class dressing room breaker.
Oh yeah,
smasher.
Well, that's why I was keeping an eye and an ear out, because it's great fun.
He's famed for it. If you play like on the edge as he does, as selflessly as he does, then you've got to be on it all the time, and it only takes a tiny shift in the dial for it to become unworkable. And hopefully we haven't seen that with him, and this is just a period of time where he's struggling for runs. But he's been trying this for a long time, and yeah, you are starting to get the sense that maybe that way of playing has had its time with Jason Roy. I hope that's not the case because I like him a lot and he's great fun to watch. And you'll struggle to find a less selfish cricketer out there than Jason Roy. But just on those two Wills, I mean, Will Jacks, it's only a matter of time before he plays for England. Only a matter of time. He's had a dream summer and could yet be the player of the year for the MVP, the PCA MVP. I think he's in second at the moment across all the formats. Brilliant cricketer playing at the top of his game.
I think he won that in 2020 as well. In the
Did
COVID
he? The
year.
overall domestic?
Or not the T20 one.
Won the T20 one, yeah, because I think he was top runs. But in the overall, which counts for all the three formats, although of course he's only playing two. Yeah, he's been superb this year, and only a matter of time before he plays for England. I think he'll probably go on that Pakistan tour for what it's worth. Both legs of it.
On the table itself, London Spirit are top with 4 wins from 4. Trent Rockets are also unbeaten. They've got 3 wins from 3, and Oval Invincibles have 3 wins from 4.
Do you remember I told you David Milan put a few notes on him?
Yeah.
So that's my moment of the week. He keeps getting runs for me.
Well done, Phil. The Women's 100 has started on Thursday. There have been lots of big scores, 3 of the 4 highest since it began last year. There have also been a few complaints about the conditions, about whether that's a good thing or not. So Danny Gibson, who plays for London Spirit, tweeted, "The size of the boundary at Headingley today for the women was too small. The women's game has developed so much since the KSL years, and the bigger boundaries make it a much better contest between fielders and batters. It was either 4 or 1s today." I guess, Phil, there's a balance to be struck between allowing lots of runs to be scored, the sort of crowd-pleasing element that brings, and allowing the manipulation of the ball into gaps and the working of the angles, etc., that can kind of make the women's game unique.
Yeah, I thought that actually earlier in the summer. I thought that it had gone a wee bit too far the other way. I think it does in the men's game as well. You know, the creeping boundaries get ever smaller. And I think we do have to be mindful of that across both formats, both gendered formats. I think there's, especially in the women's game, there's so much more going on than brute power, and I think that needs to maybe be respected a little bit more. You know, not everyone's turning up to see another 4 and another 6. There's more to the game than that. But I would say in the scale of human experience, it's not massively important either, is it?
Mm-hmm. One thing that I picked out from the Women's 100 was Oval Invincibles dropping their captain and Wisden Cricket of the Year, Danae van Niekerk, yesterday. They do have an amazing array of overseas options.
Yeah, what a team.
They dropped her for her wife, Marizanne Kapp. So Susie Bates captained instead, and they've also got Shabnam Ismail in there as well. Yeah, but it'll be interesting to see how that continues. That
and just briefly on London Spirit, the men's London Spirit, 4 from 4, having stunk the place out last year.
Yeah.
And Morgan's looked in decent fettle. Yeah, in decent nick. He got a
both
good 40 yards
and batting wise. Yeah, Trevor Bayliss is there as head coach, working his magic.
Yeah, it's good to see.
Cam, you've been to a lot of 100 this past week. Can you pick out one thing that's caught your eye?
I quite enjoyed the reaction to Marcus Stoinis got out to Mohammed Hasnain and basically inferred that he was chucking it on his way off. This got quite a big reaction on social media that it was a disgrace. I thought it was quite funny. I also potentially, I don't know if I care if people throw it. I don't think if you're allowed to throw the ball, you're no less like, let me say that one again. If you're chucking it, I don't think it makes you less skilled. Like, I don't think you can't give the ball to anyone and be like, throw it down there and you'll be an amazing world-class bowler or thrower or pitcher. And I first got this from Gareth Batty, the Surrey coach and spinner. He said if there was one rule change he could have in cricket, he'd change the flex to about 25 degrees. Because he was saying that in Sri Lanka, all the net bowlers are world class. He says because they've all grown up wanting to be like Murali. And so you net and you face these bowlers who are better than what you face in the test match. And he says they're not bad cricketers. They're incredible cricketers. And we just don't see them because we decide that the 15 degrees is the rule. So what I'm saying is,
you've rescued a very valid point there. Actually, I like that.
Oh, thanks, mate.
I like that from GB. I like that idea.
Just for context on the Hasnain Stoinis thing, Hasnain has recently returned from a ban for an illegal action, and that ban was actually preceded by another Australia all-rounder making a suggestion on the field, Moisen Reeks, during the BBL, saying "nice throw, mate," after his deliveries.
The Aussies love this. Like Dan Christian called out Chris Green, the off spinner.
They are obsessed with it, aren't they?
What a good, like, yeah, everyone, if we all throw it, we'll all have more fun. I might turn one. That's an inside joke.
Right, on to the One Day Cup. Mark asks, are we all just living in a Toby Albert universe? And Mike Martin asks, can Hants do the treble with effectively 3 different teams? Hampshire have won 5 and 5 in the One Day Cup. They've won the Blast. They are well in the running for the County Championship. Phil, can you say some nice things about Hampshire, please?
I don't need to, because the records, the numbers speak themselves. I mean, they could legitimately walk away with all 3. As we said a few weeks ago, I think they've got marginally the easier run in the 4-day stuff. Vince will be back to captain the side for that. They've got proper strength in depth, as you've seen. They have a very good youth policy as well. It helps that they have money, for sure. But they bring through good cricketers. You know, Tom Press is a very, very good young cricketer, for example, and that's what you need if you want to compete across all 3. You need players coming up through the ranks to compete in 50-over cricket. They have that. They've recruited really, really well in 4-day cricket. You know, to nab Abbas from Leicester was clever. Again, money talks, of course it does. To recognise that Kyle Abbott could commit himself basically full-time to being a Hampshire cricketer. They've done really, really well. And Vince is an interesting character in himself. And I think Joe may have touched on this on the podcast a couple of weeks ago, but he interviewed Vince, and it's a revealing interview, I thought. And Joe makes the legit point that there's a lot more substance to Vince than people think. He's quite a self-facing character, can come across as a wee bit aloof from time to time. But he's been in charge of that club since 2015, right? So that is 7 years now. He's been in charge of
all
Hampshire.
formats as well, obviously
across all formats. Yeah, that is a titanic stretch, really. And he's on the verge now of joining the ranks of the really, really top county captains, alongside, say, a Tender Charter. If you're looking across the 21st century, if they can complete this dream year, and he can walk away with the double, and the underlings can do the business in the 50-over stuff, then that goes down in legend. That's Warwickshire 94 stuff, you know. No teams won all 3 in 1 year in the 2020 era, so it would be incredible.
So Hampshire are leading Group B. Stevie Eskenazi's Middlesex are leading Group A with 4 wins from 5. Eskenazi's been in incredible form. He broke 2 quite niche records, but the record for the most list day runs in 3 consecutive innings, and becoming the first player in history to hit 3 130-plus scores in 3 consecutive list day innings. Cam, why hasn't he got a 100 deal?
I love that you can make any world record if you just caveat it with enough numbers. He scored loads of runs. I think Eskenazi is quite interesting at the moment. I think he's in a bit of limbo in that England rate him. So he was part of the England Lions squad for the 50-over stuff and scored 2 half-centuries. So they obviously consider him as part of the top 12 kind of best white ball batters in the country, in list day cricket or whatever. And yet the franchises just don't seem to fancy it. However, on the surface, that seems like a massive injustice, but I think it could actually work out really well for him. Come next year when there's a World Cup and England are looking for people who might need to have a slot in the middle order, and if no one's played the format for 4 years and you've got a bloke who's averaging 100 in the competition as this weird anomaly, he could be. I don't think it'd be fair to call him a bolter. He's obviously in their plans. He's performed when he was there. So yeah, rather than glass half empty, I think it's glass half full for Eskenazi. Keep scoring list day runs. He could be a shout for the England side.
But that's, I mean, I kind of wonder how much going forward England will look at your list day record when actually picking a 50-over side. Because of the nature of the competition, they will acknowledge that these are essentially county reserve sides, right?
Yeah.
And so they will still kind of look at T20 records, 100 records, and build from there.
For sure. But there's a weight of runs that goes along with that and the kind of rhythm of the formats. Like, no matter who's bowling at you, if you're scoring, if you're the first person ever to score 3 consecutive scores of more than 130, you're obviously doing something right.
If that doesn't count for something, the world has gone.
And so I guess the case is you have to put an extraordinary case forward, basically, right? Which is what he was doing. I think if you're somewhat just averaging 40, 50 in this kind of Royal London One Day Cup, I don't think that's really gonna
No, I'd agree
get
with
you and get you into that side.
Cheshwar Pujara is also good. He made a new List A best of 174 for Sussex and is very close to pushing his List A average above those of Virat Kohli and Babar Azam. So we'll be keeping a close eye on that. And to quickly round up the rest of world cricket this week, Shakib Al Hassan has been named Bangladesh captain for the T20 World Cup, which is nice for him. And Ireland are currently 2-1 up in a T20I series against Afghanistan. Tar, you've been watching quite a lot of Ireland this summer, and it's fair to say they've had a decent time of it without getting results over the line. What have you made of them T20 World Cup hopes, that sort of thing?
They keep pushing teams, and they've played New Zealand, South Africa, and kind of given them scares, but they just haven't had that kind of ability to get it over the line. And now they're playing Afghanistan. That these are two sides that kind of, in my head, you think they play each other all the time, but they actually haven't over the last couple of years. And Rashid Khan is really struggling, and part of me thinks that's because Ireland's batters have seen a lot of Rashid Khan over the years, and that type of thing. Harry Textor looks a good player, and scored a couple of hundreds against New Zealand.
Yeah, 200, and quick runs against India as well.
Yeah, but I mean the story that is kind of that I'm quite enjoying is sort of George Dockrell, who has been around for yonks. Came through as a left-arm spinner who got rid of Tendulkar at the World Cup. And now is just this guy who just smashes it at number 5, number 6, or kind of just in that lower middle order in a T20. Doesn't really bowl, and now is going to probably head to the T20 World Cup and be a pretty, Ireland's finisher.
Well, good stuff. That's all we've got time for this week. So thanks for listening. And if you enjoyed what you've heard, please leave us a nice, maybe even 5-star review on the app of your choice. Cheers.